Hey everyone, welcome to Keep the Community Fed podcast by White Center Food Bank. I'm one of your hosts, Carmen Smith, the Executive Director at the Food Bank.
Hey everybody, I'm Gabbi Gonzales. I'm the co-chair for the White Center Food Bank Board.
And our folks behind the scenes making this happen, production by Jefferson Rose, our Development and Communications Director.
Hey everybody, episode 5, let's go.
Episode 5.
Episode 5.
And Randy Wynn, our Marketing and Community Engagement Coordinator, videoing this for us.
Yo, episode 5, we're live.
Well, we're real excited about today's episode. If you listen to the last episode, you know that we touched upon the Trusted Messenger program, our strategic plan, and today we have a very special guest, Jackie Vaughn, who White Center Food Bank hired as our strategic planning consultant.
Yeah, great. Hi, Jackie. I'm going to read you my ode to Jackie real quick. So, Jackie, you and I met by coincidence in 2021 through the 2-day Undoing Racism training by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. You're such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to organizing through strategic planning. You help the White Center Food Bank understand its history and the systems we're a part of and make a plan to move forward towards justice. Carmen and I are co-conspirators in our own tiny piece of the movement, and we're so grateful to have you as a sister with us on this journey. Welcome, Jackie.
Welcome, Jackie.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. It was truly an honor to be a part of y'all's process. Last year was so life-giving to be a part of the work that you all did and really just went head into. I know I ask a lot of people when we do strategic planning processes, and just looking back at last year and thinking about everything that I asked folks to do and the many ways to show up, you all always came through with so much energy and commitment. And so I'm so happy to be here. And whenever y'all ask me to show up, I'm so here for it beyond the consulting work. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. And we talked about this a little bit last time, but when we were figuring out what we wanted to do for our strategic plan, Carmen and I had an idea of what we were looking for, and we had an idea of how to pivot from like a traditional strategic plan. But then you jumped in, and we'll go into this in the episode, but then you jumped in and you pushed it even that much farther and showed us how to even go like that much further. So I don't feel like it was work. I feel like it was like a passion project. It is currently a passion project.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. I think you just shaped it so much better than what Gabbi and I had imagined. And so that is part of what was so special about working with you. Like, obviously, you have a wealth of knowledge. You have a lot of experience doing this work. And I'd love for you to take some time to just let listeners know who you are a little bit, maybe your background, anything you want to share, and like how you found yourself doing this work.
Wonderful. So, hi everyone. Again, my name is Jackie Vaughn. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an anti-racist organizer and consultant. I do strategic planning, organizational development, and facilitation support for organizations, and really focus on supporting organizations in implementing anti-racist principles and values into their work, and doing it in a way where they are shifting power towards the community. And it takes a lot of commitment, and not every organization I know is ready for that. But when organizations like the White Center Food Bank do commit to doing that, I feel like we make, beautiful work together in commitment to the communities that we serve. I'm also the executive director of Surge Reproductive Justice as well here in Seattle. And so a lot of my work is really focused on supporting Black women and Black femmes and Black, queer, and trans and non-binary folks in our communities. I'm also a mama as well. I have a 5-year-old who I'm pretty sure is going to be a future organizer because she's starting with me and her dad and other ones in our family as well. And she's really effective at it and loves anything to do around climate justice and environmental justice. So more to come with her and the work that she'll be doing that I'm sure will go farther than myself. And yeah, how I got into this work. Originally from Seattle and grew up in Spokane, though, on the east side of the state. And I feel like that was the what shaped my idea around race and structural racism was going from living in Seattle to then going to Spokane. And when I lived in Seattle, we lived actually in White Center. And so, you know, I knew that we were low income when I was younger, but the way that poverty looked felt different when everybody around you has a shared cultural background. And there's just a different sense of community versus going to Spokane, where poverty looked different with whiteness, but also when you're not white. For those of you who are listening and maybe can't see, I'm Black and Mexican American. It was such a culture shock to go to somewhere that at one point, I believe Spokane was considered one of the whitest places in this country.
Wow.
Yeah, per capita. And so, yeah, the different things that I would hear, and I could just tell off the bat that, you know, that the way that race was thought about in Spokane was different, but also just the way that poverty and race looked in Spokane was very different. And so I think because I spent most of my childhood as like an outsider there in Spokane, it allowed me to be an observer. And that's just something, that's just something that I got really used to, was making observations. Like I'd always be watching everything and everyone all the time. And I guess like analyzing different situations. And I kind of became known for making everything about race, even when I was younger. And my teachers would try to tell me, like, no, it's not always about race, or I think you just misinterpreted
Is it
that.
not always about race?
Exactly. They would tell me I was like misinterpreting things. Or I remember one time that it was in my honors English class where we had this assigned reading, and the reading, it over and over used the N word, and it was like supposed to be like a historical timepiece. And I remember going to the teacher. Well, first I had told my mom that evening, I didn't really feel comfortable that we were assigned this in class, because I know that people are going home and reading this, and there's no education in our school about race and racism. And so my mom's like, well, what are you going to do about it? And I was like, well, I'm going to tell the teacher that I didn't feel comfortable. And so I told the teacher, and she was like, well, that's just specialized vocabulary,
Wow.
What's the definition for specialized vocabulary?
Exactly. And so when I asked her to explain, she couldn't give me an answer for that, and so it's just little things all the time. And so then when I went to college, had the opportunity to study race and culture studies at Eastern and get my minor in Chicana studies. And then it was there that I was finally validated that structural racism exists.
Yeah.
And that all the different things that, I would notice when I was younger, that was true, and that was happening, and that, professors were able to show us like the policies, the laws, and the data and research to back it up. And that was what a lot of my degree was focused on, was looking at how to connect what has happened historically here in the U.S. towards communities of color, whether it's the social treatments or policies and laws, and how that's playing out today, or the ramifications for it, and how we look at disproportionalities in outcomes, whether that's around health, food insecurity, all the different metrics that we measure in society, looking for those disproportionate rates and understanding that what's causing that is systemic oppression and racism. And so then, since when I was studying that, it's like, well, what can you do with a race and culture studies degree, besides become a professor, which I was like, that's not really what I want to do, because I don't want to just go to college to then do something that's only for me. I want to do something that can benefit my community. And that's when I decided to become a community organizer. And ever since then, it's been about organizing for me. And really grateful to have been mentored by many wonderful organizers here in Seattle who've really laid a strong foundation for anti-racist organizing in this area.
Thanks for sharing that. I really feel like when it comes to like anti-racism, like social organizing, I almost feel like it is hereditary. I feel that same thing, like that it came from my mom and myself, and it was in me from the time that I was young, and like recognizing these things. And when folks are like, why are you making everything about race? It's because it's so integrated into everything that we do, right? That I'm making it about race because the history of the United States was based on that. And it's like a factually made up construct, right?
Exactly.
That we need to really dissect and
Exactly.
rebuild.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember, so I feel like, for my family, definitely coming from a working class background, and being the first to go to college in my family, that folks didn't have the words or definitions to articulate what their experiences were in this country, but they knew that something was different. Like my mom would always be like, we have to work twice as hard just to get half as much. Or thinking about her experience as a woman of color around safety and bodily safety, thinking about what it meant to, protect herself as a woman of color, but also knowing that, if you do protect yourself, you're more likely not to be like listened to or believed or seen as the aggressor, and what you have to do to like overcompensate for that as well. And so one of the things that I do feel so grateful for and blessed, is the opportunity to understand how these systems work, so that to kind of disrupt that pattern that I think a lot of communities of color that we're often so taught to like blame ourselves for what our communities are experiencing, versus being able to have the language to identify that, oh, this is structural oppression, that systems and institutions are causing this, to our communities, and that, I feel like that's a privilege to be able to do that, instead of having to walk around and be like, what can I do better? Why haven't I, been able to lift myself out of this situation, when we know that there's so much going on all the time that is intentionally working against our communities to exploit them.
I recognize that in my own journey, whether it was reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or going through the Undoing Racism training, it was like the information that I learned while reading or going through those things didn't inform me. It it helped me articulate what I had already been experiencing and learning, but I didn't have the words,
Yep.
how you were talking about observing throughout your childhood. It was like my lived experience, but I didn't know how to like convey that.
Exactly. And that's why I was so excited to work with you all in your strategic planning processes, because one of the things that really motivates me around working with organizations like y'all is that, you have different people within the organization who have the understanding and the language, but how do we support everyone to have that shared understanding and language, so that when everyone comes together, we can all identify what the problem is and then collectively name our strategies. And when we can name the same thing, then we all know what we're talking about and then can go forth with the plan together. Because I think a lot of times I'll see different nonprofits that you can have, all the staff together, but if they name the problem in different ways, they're going to have different strategies and tactics to be able to address the problem. And so I feel like when we came out of y'all's process, that folks could get to that collective understanding around like what the problem is and how y'all's work as the White Center Food Bank is working to address that, and what your lane is around food justice and food sovereignty and supporting to do that work as a food bank.
You and Gabbi have been really good about reminding me about that lesson, that we need to take a step back and all use the same language, because you're right, like not everybody has that same language and has been exposed to it. Thinking about like even the term white supremacy, like how that can kind of rub people the wrong way if we don't define it together. It's easy to misinterpret it and think that you're calling someone out specifically. And Jackie, something you taught me along the way that I use all the time now is that we're tough on institutions, but we're gentle on people. And thinking about the term white supremacy, like that, your lesson always reminds me, like we're talking about the institution of white supremacy. We're not talking about like white individuals. And so that has been so valuable for me, even on my journey. So I just really appreciate you.
Yeah, no, it's so funny that you say that, because when we were going through our process, so also right now I'm going through a master's in public administration program. So this is my second year.
Yes. MPA.
Yes. Shout out to Tacoma Evergreen and the late Dr. Mims, who founded that program there in Tacoma. But last year when it was my first year, and I was going through the program at the same time that I was doing, the strategic planning process, we were reading the book, An Indigenous People's History of the U.S. And how the class is structured is that we have these seminar groups. And there is one student in my seminar group, one of my colleagues, who, he definitely always last year, not so much this year, I think we're in a better place in understanding, but definitely last year, white cis het male, he would always come after me, like every time we would have seminar, they were supposed to be discussions, but everything would be like a challenge to like, anytime I said like my discussion point, just so I could get my participation points in class, he would always have a follow-up question for me. And I was like, oh Lord, like I just wanted to say my piece so the professor knew that I read, what we were supposed to read for today. And we were reading that book, An Indigenous People's History in the U.S. And he was like, basically had said something about like, oh, do I think like everything is, rooted in systemic racism? Because we were talking about current day programs from government agencies, and how could I say that like all of them can create systemic inequality? And, that is such a broad statement to make. And then I was like trying not to go after him as an individual, even though it's at the end of the night, because those classes are from 6 to 9 p.m. And I was like, okay, Jackie, take a step back and use your facilitation skills. And the chapter that we were supposed to be discussing was actually the chapter where they were talking about the unconventional war tactics that the colonizers were using on the indigenous people. And one of them was how they were destroying their food sources to make them reliant on European food sources that they were bringing over from Europe. And that was like part of their tactics that they were using against the native and indigenous people. And so I was talking about the work that we were doing in your strategic planning process about learning the history of food sovereignty and food justice. And I gave the example to my classmates about what in our reading from that we were supposed to do that week would this client that I was working with, I didn't name y'all specifically, I said a food bank, that I was working with, should they know in order to make correct decisions about the work that they do, or else they would play into systems that have been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country. And then one of my other classmates, not the person who was going at me, like raised their hand enthusiastically, and they were like, I know, it was about the food systems and how they were destroying like native people's original food systems and making them reliant on the European food. They're like, is that right? And I was like, exactly. Like, if organizations like the food bank that I'm working with and other nonprofits do not look at what has historically happened in this country, we could just be thinking that we're making decisions based off of like our own ideas, not realizing that the actions and decisions that we're making are actually rooted in decisions that could be causing harm, could be stemming from structural oppression that's been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country. And I know in the work that we did, we looked at the USDA food system and the funding that goes between food banks and the USDA food system, and how that, basically the government like gives you all money that basically purchase food from these big agricultural farm systems, and how, you don't as a food bank have choice in that.
Right.
And we know the history of the farm system in this country. And after reading that book, I my own self became, educated on the role that played in the colonization of this country as well. And so it's that type of intentionality that's so important, but also bringing people along in that process. Because I could have just went after that guy, like at the end of the night, being so tired and frustrated with his questions. But to like be able to bring people along and to be like, hey, like I'm not just criticizing systems to criticize them, but really looking, all you have to do is look at the history of this country, and our reading that we had been assigned in class did all the work for me.
Sorry.
You go.
I'll be quick. You still ended up as a professor. Start calling you Professor Jackie.
I agree. I was just going to say that I believe knowledge is power, and just talking about understanding the history, right? The history of whiteness, the history of like how we came to where we are today, and like education and understanding of like the histories is where power really lies for white people too, right? Because whiteness did a very specific thing to the population that is named white. And I truly believe, and this is like part of a quote from, I'm sure, some like incredible Black Indigenous person, but where our liberation is tied together for freedom. That's how I walk through the world, is believing that and understanding that when we truly understand where we've come from, and we can understand where we want to go.
Exactly. That is definitely something that is so, I feel like, important for cross-racial organizing, is how do we get especially white folks to understand that this work is not for just Black and brown folks. It's for them as well, because again, if we look at our food system, that if we're talking about food insecurity, we know that communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by food insecurity and the injustices in our food system that, manifest in that critical and unjust way. But then if we zoom out and look at all the different aspects of our food system and how it's unjust, we also know just the different ways that, chemicals are put into our food, the way that processed foods are marketed towards us. We see how everyone is impacted by it. Yes, communities of color are going to be disproportionately impacted by it, but white folks in this country are being impacted by our food system. They're being impacted by the GMO foods, They're being impacted by the food system that is pushing fast foods and processed foods on our kids and on our families. The fact that there are so many foods that are on our grocery store aisles that are literally banned in other countries, And so when communities of color are being disproportionately impacted, yes, we are being disproportionately impacted and we should be leading, solutions and centered in that work. But everybody is being impacted, and the quality of life that white folks, are receiving in this country is being impacted by the same racist policies that communities of color are experiencing as well. So how is it that we get them to invest in these liberation strategies is important for this work too.
Yes, just even thinking about how, like, in the grocery store, right? Like, you're shopping for your family and your budget goes so much further if you're buying food that's processed, and it's cheaper than produce. Like, we hear that all the time at the food bank, right? Like, produce and eating healthy is expensive, and working families, have some really tough choices to make, spend time with their kids or be stuck in the kitchen. We don't, as a country, we don't make it easy for families to eat healthy, especially with the grocery prices the way we are seeing them today. Like, that is something I think across the board we can all commiserate on together. A big topic of discussion right now are eggs at the food bank and the price of eggs. And so even just thinking about processed foods, right? Like, they're cheap because a lot of them use a corn or soybean base, right? Or sweetener, which is subsidized at a very, very strong rate. And so it drives the price down for those foods. What were you going to say before I cut you off?
Well, I'm really glad that you did, because that was like totally playing into the conversation. And I was going to say that Jackie had mentioned solutions, and we've kind of teased a little bit about the Undoing Racism training. I wonder if we should talk a little bit about like that so folks understand, and then our strategic plan process.
Sure. Who wants to start?
Yay, I can start.
Great.
One of my favorite things to talk about. So, yes, Gabbi had mentioned that actually our first time meeting each other was at a People's Institute for Survival and Beyond's Undoing Racism training. And essentially, for those of you, if you've never attended one of these are a 2-day training regarding anti-racism and anti-racist community organizing. And here in the Seattle area, we are very lucky to actually be the site of one of the kind of community network locations where we have regional workshops, or historically have had regional workshops, working to bring those back on a more consistent basis. But the People's Institute has been around for over 40 years, started by two Black men who were organizers, and back in the day were looking for organizing trainings so that they could become more effective organizers. And they attended some of the more traditional organizing trainings by Saul Alinsky's model. And when they came out of those trainings, they realized a couple of things. That one, those trainings did not mention racism and race. And as two Black men, particularly from the South, they knew that if they were going to be effective at organizing, they needed organizing trainings that talked about race and racism. And two, they noticed that there wasn't a lot of talk about culture and the importance of culture in organizing. And so they ended up creating joining the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in this Undoing Racism training. And for myself, before going through the training, I had been through lots of different organizing trainings, a lot of union model trainings, different type of community organizing trainings. And I personally always felt when I went through different type of organizer trainings that they were good at teaching tactics. Like, I learned a lot of good tactics, and I felt like I was effective as an organizer around mobilizing people. Like, if you needed people to get to a phone bank, to get to a rally, like, boom, I could do those things pretty easily. But I always felt like there was something missing around leadership development. When I worked at other organizations before coming to my current one, I would always look at the folks that we were bringing to like the state capitol for lobby days and think like, wow, like we're bringing people all the way to the capitol. When I worked at when I worked at an organization on the east side of the state and we would bring people to lobby day, here in Olympia, I'd be like, these people are coming all the way across the state, sometimes doing it in one day, there and back. And they cannot talk about the bills that were there. They're just excited for the t-shirt, that they get and to meet their legislator. But they, there's no empowerment here, They're not leading this policy work that they should be the ones who were part of creating this and being able to really push this. And I never really saw a lot in organizing trainings that taught real leadership development. It was really about mobilizing until I met the People's Institute and went through their training that it actually talked about racism and centered that in their training and really used a framework for how do we move past just focusing on mobilization tactics to real shifting power and investing in leadership development and using this set of anti-racist principles. And for someone like myself who is like a super organizing nerd and like has read a lot of books about different people's organizing, and like in my books I always have like a little acronym that stands for OT, which stands for organizing tactic. And so like different books that I've read about organizing, I'll be like, oh, this is an organizing tactic, OT. But I think the People's Institute's anti-racist principles, if you look at good organizing, those anti-racist principles have always been there. So when I met them, I was like, okay, like I get this. This makes sense. This framework that you can use to hold people together, to have a real definition around organizing. I think there's a lot of different ways you can explain organizing, and that's completely fine. But having a shared way to be able to do it allows people to evaluate each other. Because like if Gabbi thinks that organizing is one thing, I think organizing is another thing, and we go to create a work plan, it's going to be two different things versus, hey, Gabbi, I'm saying that organizing is working with people to analyze power, get a sense of their own power, and create solutions together. Then that means when we go to create a work plan, I better see like how you're doing that in each and every step. And so essentially, that is the definition that the People's Institute uses. And that workshop is done in a way that uses popular education, which is so important. And if you don't know what popular education is, it's a style of teaching that was popularized by an educator from Brazil named Pablo Ferrari. Yes. Oh my goodness. Why did I forget his name? That he uses this style of teaching that really, it started with teaching people who could not read. And he really centered this idea that like you bring out of people what they already know, and you can teach them that way. And so essentially the anti-racist principles support organizations to give them metrics on how they're centering the communities that they serve and sharing power. And so when people approach me, when organizations approach my firm for strategic planning, I try to be very clear around the expectations that this is not your typical strategic planning, where we're going to go through, the typical process and, we're going to create this vision and your tactics and what your programs are going to be and all that kind of fluffy stuff. But we're going to do some deep examination and to critically think about what does centering the community that you're supposed to be serving look like? And what does shifting power, sharing power look like? And having honest conversations about what it means to be a gatekeeper as an institution and not seeing it as a negative word or term, but understanding that anybody who works in a nonprofit and
we're all gatekeepers.
Exactly. And once we can define that, then we can understand how we're gatekeepers and work to share power with the community that we serve. And so, you all, like I said, y'all went like head in on it. And I don't think there was anything that I asked for in this process that you didn't do or find a way to accommodate.
So, to talk about how the White Center Food Bank organized around the Undoing Racism training is we invited the board as a requirement, all staff and a section of our volunteers to attend. You said 2 days earlier, but wasn't ours 3?
It was
Did we get a
3.
bonus
Yours was
day?
3. Yeah, sometimes they're 2, and sometimes if you're real lucky, they can be 3 days.
Yeah, we were lucky. We got 3 days.
And I appreciate that the People's Institute approach is so reasonable, and it's like anybody can start there. Like, I think that the Undoing Racism training has a reputation for being a lot, but it's actually not a lot, and it walks you through a journey, right? With very basic questions like why are people poor? Why do we think people are poor? Why are people actually poor? And then you have an opportunity to do the foot ID, which is like any city block in any poor community, right? And putting everything on the map and realizing that things are constructed in a certain way for a certain population of people, and getting us to like the definition of race and then walking towards lived experience and solution. So I think it's the willingness, really. We were talking about this earlier, but the willingness to learn is all that you need for that training. And it will really deliver things in a way that you can carry on with you afterward.
Exactly.
In your presentation proposal for our strategic plan, you had mentioned taking the Undoing Institutional Racism training, and I had never taken it before, but I know Jefferson had, and you had, and both of you had really good experiences, and it made sense in the bigger picture too. It wasn't something we had even asked for, and this is why you've been so great, is that you've come up with things better than we could have imagined. But kind of to take it a step back, and I know we've talked about this before, but in really thinking about where White Center Food Bank was in 2022, our organization, right, has been around since the early 1970s, like a lot of other food banks, and we're definitely much more thoughtful about how we carry out our work, but at the end of the day, it's really just the same thing that we had been doing for 50 years. And so this strategic planning process is a real opportunity for us to be different and to be intentional and be better in how we could bring our customers to the forefront along in this work. And starting with the People's Institute, right, gave us all that baseline with language to be able to use and understand what larger system is at play before we started kind of looking into our specific industry of the food system.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciate about organizations who choose to go through that process, is that it's so easy to try to jump into the work of strategic planning or the work of your nonprofit and look at the individuals in the community and, either look at them as a problem or jump super quickly into different programs and supports and approaches, very reactionary, approaches, versus stepping back and understanding that for hundreds of years, things have been operating in a certain way to keep hierarchies in place in this country. And if we are going to do our work in an effective way, we have to be super, super, super strategic and intentional about that and have a clear understanding of how these injustices have been able to go on for so long and what we can do in our lane to disrupt this. Because I think sometimes for some people, when they go through the process that we facilitate, they'll be like, you can't expect us to solve racism or undo this. And I'm like, I'm not putting that on you all. I completely understand that. What I am asking you to do is to think about your role and your organization and what steps you all can take. Because my ultimate vision as an organizer or consultant is all the different organizations that I work with to think about if all of us were slowly making this transition to think this way and be intentional, the ripple effect that we could have in our area and the work that we do to slowly move away from being reactionary and being intentional about dismantling structural oppression and the way that these hierarchies have been structured for, the hundreds of years that this country has been set up.
Like you get to be a part of reimagining what things could look like if they were just.
Exactly. And that's what, for me, is such an honor and a privilege to be a part of with different organizations who invite me to be a part of that process.
Yeah, something I think about in this work is that I might not be around to see like the fruits of the labor, right? But it's not about that. It's not necessarily about for me to enjoy. It's like a privilege, right? To be able to do this work and work towards something that could benefit the next generation or generations down the line.
So Imani can pick it up.
Yes. And she is so ready and waiting to do it. I'll be like, okay, baby. Like if she was in this room with all of these mics right now, oh my goodness, there would be nothing to hold her back. When she sees a mic, she is like beelining for it. We were at a press conference with former Governor Inslee last year, and he had kids there. And the first thing she asked was, can she go up on the mic? And I was like, baby, no, he just wants photos with y'all, not for you to take over the mic, not today. Like, that's not that type of rally. So yeah,
gotta get Ruben and Imani together.
Yeah, the next generation of keep the community fed.
My son's the same way.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay, so sweet.
But there's an indigenous principle, right, that you think about 7 generations ahead of you. And I try to keep that in the back of my mind, because sometimes doing this work, it is really hard, right? Because it feels like you're putting in all this effort and you're not getting to see the change, but sometimes taking a step back and just reminding myself, like, I might never see it. I think in Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, or what is it?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
At the end of the book, she talks about Nelson Mandela and how sometimes it takes a whole lifetime just to see the smallest increment of change. And so I remind myself of that too.
Is that the good thing though? Like knowing that you don't have to take the whole burden on?
Yeah, that is a positive way to think about it, right? It's like less soul crushing, I guess. Like, it's not all up to me.
It's just our job to do our best to set up the next generation, and then trust and believe and teach, right? Teach them, but they always end up teaching me, I think. Whenever I work with youth, more than I think I'm able to teach them.
I love that.
So we took the People's Institute Undoing Racism training as like the starter for our strategic plan. And then we had a bunch of sessions with you, with the staff mostly, where the board was invited to come, and some board members did participate. But kind of a big thing around that was just, thinking of like the traditional strategic plan is like a board retreat over a weekend where they do the mission statement and then like present it to the staff to carry it out. And board members, they aren't there on the day to day, and so for us it was really important that our staff had a voice in being a part of the strategic plan, because they are there for the day to day. They're the experts in their work, and really want them to be a part of what they're going to be doing, essentially. So I love that we kind of we got to learn about the history of the food system and food banks itself. It wasn't something that I knew. And it was really fun the way that you presented it too. What was your thought process on that?
Yeah, so for doing this work, one of the anti-racist principles is the principle of analyzing power. And then what kind of goes in hand with that is the second principle of undoing racism. So the two kind of go together. And when working with organizations, it's really important to almost kind of like wake people up to how systemic racism is playing out and where it comes from. And so for myself, I was like, okay, again, my degree was in race and culture studies. So I know that if I go back and do research, I can usually find what it is that I need to find historically. So I was like, okay, sit down, Jackie, do the research on food banks. And so I sat down, and it was like, lo and behold, I could not have stumbled upon it if I had made it up, but found the history of food banks and what they called, and this is, I kid you not, if you Google it, like the history of food banks, this is the type of terminology that will come up, but he was called the father of food banks. So off the bat, you have some real paternalistic terminology. And I'm blanking on his name. I probably like blocked it out because the story's so horrible.
It's probably for the better.
Exactly. But yeah, essentially, you have this very privileged white man who apparently he gets into he has a pretty, extensive medical injury that I believe like left him like paralyzed or partially paralyzed for a year or something like that. And he decided to like give up his money and access to wealth and live a life of charity after he got healed. And so after that, he did a lot of work with Catholic churches, I believe, and in soup kitchens. And then it found information that basically one day he was in an alley and found this woman with her children digging through dumpsters behind grocery stores.
He was in the alley because he took a vow of poverty?
Well, so yeah, he took a vow of poverty and moved around to different places and was helping in soup kitchens. One day was just randomly walking through an alley, just going through a stroll, I guess, to clear his mind, and comes across this woman and her children going through a dumpster behind grocery stores. And, his first question to her, I guess, is something like, wow, you and your children look so well fed to be, he didn't use the term houseless, but, ask them, to be houseless. How is it that you look so well fed and, maintained? And basically, the woman like responded like, oh, that a lot of these grocery stores like throw away food that is like still good. And she goes and finds it. And he was like, wow, like I could do this at the soup kitchen, and then we could get this food and give it out at the soup kitchen. And so then he started doing that. And then lo and behold, he starts getting like money from the government to like expand this idea and then create like policy at the national level. He ended up getting support to export the idea to different countries in South America and Africa and created all this policy. And I remember just reading it thinking like, wow, like white privilege is wild because
Policy written by
Yeah.
a white man who took a vow of poverty and the government that
exactly,
then is imposed upon poor
exactly.
communities.
But also the idea wasn't his.
Yeah, exactly.
right.
So it was just so many things that I was like, this is wild. I can't believe I'm reading this. Because then at the same time, because I was like, I was so shocked because I was like, because, you know, the Black Panther, like, you know, breakfast program, everything that we know that happened to them. So that was like running through my mind. And I think I like called one of my friends. I was like, girl, like, you're not going to believe how like food banks started. And I was like, now think about the Black Panthers, you know, and what happened to the Black Panther, like free breakfast program, you know, like COINTELPRO going after them. Then the breakfast program finally, you know, being co-opted by the, you know, government, and breakfasts in schools not even being like nutritionists for our kids. And then it like dawned on me. I was like, ooh, I was like, so, you know, my daughter, she loves story time at bedtime. Like she loves stories so much. And I was like, you know what, for our activity for the food bank, when we go and do the principle of understanding history and analyzing power, I was like, I'm going to present it as a story so people understand again the significance of like what you are operating under, that if you don't understand that context, you don't understand what you're working under, and especially understanding like why the US government would prop this idea up so much but yet bring down the forces of the CIA against the Black Panthers when they were setting up this self-determined, you know, community-led breakfast program. Because a big part of what comes out of the People's Institute is understanding the need for our communities to have self-determination and to have power over what's happening. And so the difference between what happened between the Black Panthers and what happened to this man who's considered the father of the food bank system. So I told the stories without telling any context about like, oh, this is the father of, you know, the food bank system, and this was the Black Panther Party. I just told all the stories. I was like, oh, we're gonna do story time, you know, blah blah blah, and said the different stories. And then after did that, I said what the stories actually were. One is the history of the food banks. One is the Black Panther free breakfast program. Why are they treated so differently? Now understand how that applies to your work around food banks, food sovereignty, and food justice in community power.
I think you even made us guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, at least with the Black Panther story.
Okay, yeah,
She
okay.
left out like that detail, and then she's like, does anybody know what group of people this happened to? And there were a few of us that got it. A few people were like, new. Yeah, but it was a good exercise, especially with the People's Institute training that we had gone through before, right? It was a good example of the distribution of power. So again, I really love that you had us kind of focus on just the histories of, you know, the nation and then the food bank system as well. And it really gave us a lot of good context to think about what's next for White Center Food Bank. And that's when we moved into our 5-year strategic or 5-year growth chart. So just kind of like thinking about like, where is the food bank going to go next?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So what I really appreciate about you all is that you really took the time to struggle and critically think as a group, to think about the work and the tangible actions that the food bank that you all do as an organization. How is that a part of a process to get the community closer and to support the community in the goal of food justice. And everything that you all outlined, you all could specifically and intentionally talk about how it was a part of that work. And that, for myself as a facilitator and consultant, is the ultimate goal, is that you all as an organization can look at the work that you do and say how it is getting you closer to your goals, and a part of that larger work to supporting the community and building that self-determination and shifting and sharing power with the community. And when we went through the 5-year growth process to map it out, we thought about what sustainability looked like in that work. That, you know, it was really exciting to be able to list out all the great things that you all want to do as an organization. Now let's think about how to do it in a sustainable way, because we want to see you all here to be able to do that work. And of course, doing it all in the first year is not going to be possible. As an executive director, you know, of course, Carmen, I salute you. I know what it takes to fundraise for an organization, to support, you know, the exciting goals and programs that the organization and the staff wants to do, and also the fundraising that it takes to be able to do that. And so let's do it in a sustainable way. Let's do it in a way that we know that we are moving towards our goals, but also not overextending ourselves internally as an organization, or over promising to the community on things that we can't deliver on, and breaking that trust. And really thinking about what it's going to take to make sure that we plan things out in an intentional way over the next 5 years. And so going through that process with you all again, I really saw the intentionality around it. I appreciated how, you know, there was the ability for different folks on staff to be able to participate in that. I think throughout the whole process, again, just want to lift up your leadership, Carmen, around really trying to address power dynamics and hierarchies, so that you know, all staff were able to participate, and that everybody felt, or I hope that they felt valued in the process, and, you know, had the ability to contribute, that it wasn't just a small select group of people within the organization who got to make the decisions, but it was a collaborative process. And we worked really hard to make sure that people contributed to this and understood, and that we brought everybody through a process together.
I hope the staff felt really valued during that process too, because I mean, right, they are the ones that are doing the work. I really just, you know, me, Jefferson, and Mike really just see our roles as like supporting roles really for them. Like, they tell us what they need, and then, you know, we go out and try to do it. And so having everybody involved was really important. And you know, the leadership team really tried to not only be the voices that are heard in the room, even during that. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge, just with staff dynamics, right? And you know, the executive director gets all the runway to be able to say all the things that they want to say. So me taking a step back was really important in making sure that everyone was able to share their voice if they wanted to, and even encourage them to be able to participate. And I was really impressed. Like, everybody, you know, was able to share and ask questions, and they were all really involved. And I think you got to see just how much the organization means to all of them, how much the customers mean to all of them. And I think they're really excited to have gone through that process together and be able to decide, like, okay, you know, growing this program in that short amount of time isn't feasible for us. And can we do it, later in 2028? And then having that reassurance from you and from other folks, like, yeah, we don't have to rush into everything, right? Because a lot of times you get like the outline of the strategic plan and you're like, oh, I have to do all these things in like the next 2 years. It's not practical.
Yeah.
It's not feasible. And I think even going through the strategic planning process with you and it taking time, but I think that kind of like set the stage for the intentionality that we're carrying with us moving forward.
One of the things that I'd like to acknowledge with the way that we've done our strategic plan and centered our work is we've talked about how that's a pivot and that requires folks to trust and it requires folks to be vulnerable. And when doing something different, that can be really emotional and hard. And so one piece of the strategic plan that we didn't talk about that I just want to mention is even though going to the Undoing Racism training is possible for anybody, it can be like emotionally challenging. And we wanted to build a place of reflection afterward. And so we actually brought a skill into the White Center Food Bank, racial identity caucusing, which is basically splitting up by Black, Indigenous, and people of color and white folks to have some separate conversations around all the feelings that can be going on after a pretty heavy duty training and hearing about pivoting the way that the organization's going to do the work. So we can reflect and let some of those feelings out and then really make a plan for action. So I think that was a key part of our process, and I wanted to make sure we talked about that a little too.
Oh, good call. Could you tell listeners why, like, the purpose for racial caucusing? Like, why separate the groups?
Yeah, so racial identity caucusing, folks are split up in the way that they are for a couple reasons. One, it reflects like how the United States actually exists because segregation is a real thing. And then also because the two different groups have different work to do around anti-racism work. White folks reflecting on what whiteness has looked like in the United States and how to pivot the way that they're making a plan for action and how they're really centering BIPOC folks in that work. And then BIPOC folks really getting to hold space for each other for what is a hard journey sometimes, and really building community and getting to reimagine how we structurally and individually start to move forward differently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So then we moved into our Trusted Messenger program after doing the 5-year growth chart. And I just love like how you're so methodical and how each step that we take kind of plays into the next. And the Trusted Messenger program was definitely something Gabbi and I felt really strongly about from the beginning, and it was included in, our original scope of work. And again, it's just it's going back to this idea that the customers should have a say in what's happening at White Center Food Bank. It's, that they're the expert in their own lives and they know exactly what they need. It doesn't do them any good if like Carmen is just making all the decisions because this is what Carmen thinks. Like I'm not the one that's living that life, even though I have lived experience that resonates with our customer base. But really at the end of the day, it's shifting that power back to community, to the folks that are using the food bank. And so, I've never done a Trusted Messenger program before. And so can you talk about your process and what you proposed for us?
Yeah, so definitely when I first saw the initial scope of work and request for proposals for this, that caught my eye for sure that you all were already moving in that direction of wanting a trusted messenger program because ultimately at the end of the day, the strategic planning process is extremely important for the organization to get into that process of creating shared definitions as an organization and to become intentional about the work that you all do. But if that work is not informed by the community that you serve and you're not sharing that power and decision making power, then you're going to fall into the same trap. So this trusted messenger program, the way that that it's looked at is how can this become an ongoing process within the White Center Food Bank, where you're working to actively build relationships with the customers that you serve, build understanding with them on how the food bank works. Because one of my biggest pet peeves about working with the community that you serve and asking them for feedback is when you don't provide context, understanding, and education with them on how your work happens and the operations that yes, we have the answers as those who are directly and disproportionately impacted, but if we don't know how your job works or how it functions, then it's so difficult to be able to provide feedback as someone who gets asked to sit on different government,
Yeah.
groups and advisory boards, and they, ask you to come on there and they're trying to be accountable to the community. And then they're like, what should we do? And it's like, okay, well, I need to know more about how you do what you
Mm-hmm.
do in order to provide feedback. Once I understand that, then yes, I can provide feedback, but you can't just expect somebody to give you feedback about your job and they don't know what it is that you do and how you do it. So the first year is really looking at, just how do you start those building those lines of communication about, well, what is the food bank? How do we do what we do? What is our strategic plan? What are some of the big decisions that we make? And in that process, also asking them for feedback on some of the decisions that need to be made at the food bank that the White Center Food Bank is actually going to take that feedback and use it to make a decision on, because I think that that's the next big part about building trust is that our communities are so used to being surveyed and asked for their feedback and then nothing happens from that.
Yeah.
So then we were so intentional about, well, what we're going to ask in these community listening sessions are actually decisions that came out of the strategic planning process and the 5-year growth chart that need to be made, but we're using these spaces to hear from the customers and the community that this White Center Food Bank serves or is attempting to build relationships with and to serve, to get that feedback from and make the decision based on that. And then it's going to be able to culminate after the year-long process with a community report back so that there's transparency as well. And the intention and hope is that this will keep on going, and then this will build a base of people that are
Mm-hmm.
informed and involved, that will continue to be a part of this process within the White Center Food Bank, and that when decisions need to be made, there's a space and a process that the White Center Food Bank can come to and bring that to the customers that use the food bank. And that's a part of that shifting and sharing power. So we're moving away from, the father of the food bank model and, trying to get closer to a more self-determined approach because, essentially, we could operate under a typical model where, the food bank is just pushing the food that they select on the community versus moving in a way where the community has say over the food that's coming into their community and how it's coming in. Knowing, of course, that there's limited resources, that's not like a infinite amount, but with the abundance approach that they are taking and the approach that they're taking to share and shift power, that's key, and understanding that we don't have food insecurity because there's just, an actual lack of food in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We have food insecurity because we have systemic oppression that has created unequal power dynamics where the communities who are experiencing that food insecurity don't have say and power over the food in their community. And the White Center Food Bank is working in the lane that they're in and within the scope of power that they have to support in shifting power.
And then even broadening it more. So as we ask our customers and we're sharing and shifting power, acknowledging who in the White Center community is not at the table, so we can intentionally go build those relationships, right? And broaden our reach, broaden our organizing.
Exactly. And I'm excited for them because they're modeled after a program that I've done in the past before on a campaign that I've worked on, and they're going to be centered around community and food. And that's definitely one of the things that I've loved about working with the food bank is the culture here around sharing food with each other and centering that. Yes. I definitely feel like I was fed well throughout this process, definitely. But yeah, they are definitely going to be, community-centered conversations, that folks will be able to have, and, really just celebrating the knowledge that community has and being able to build those relationships with new folks and, culminating in a community celebration to share back that information and be transparent with the community as well. And I'll be excited to attend the first one to provide any support or feedback. But this is the type of work that, I hope to see more organizations move towards, that, our communities need to have control and say over the institutions that are operating within their communities, that are operating on behalf of them, receiving grant money, and funding on behalf of them, that we want to move towards communities that are self-determined, and we need nonprofits like what the White Center Food Bank is doing that are going to be critical of themselves and to really think about how they are gatekeepers in their community and to identify what they're going to do to share power with the community that they serve.
Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And we've talked about that in previous episodes, really shifting the way that we're doing things as a model that can be shared out to other nonprofit organizations and just organizations in general to really build towards that very, very slow systemic change.
This episode is such a good episode for February.
Yes.
Just thinking about February being Black History Month, like Jackie's shared a wonderful description of like what we're doing at our organization. And if there are listeners that, are in the nonprofit work or interested in community organizing, like it seems like a really good way that folks could maybe spend Black History Month, like just even thinking about what they could do next. But I'm curious how you two think about Black History Month. Like, are there any traditions that you try to practice during Black History Month? Yeah. Well, actually, sorry, I feel like I've talked so much. I'm gonna let Gabby go first, and then I can go.
You're our guest.
Okay.
They get to hear from her all the time.
I talk enough every episode.
I was like, wow,
I love you, Gabby.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes. So, I mean, definitely I feel like since I was younger that I definitely always took Black History Month to really go, deeper into the research for sure. And now that I have my little one, we definitely will go extra hard in buying, like, if there's any type of like Black history like books, or last year we found fact cards, but yeah, they get me around this time of year. But this I think going through that with her has been so much fun, and being able to share that with her, creating our own like little curriculums during this time. She's in kindergarten now, and so I'm curious to see what the school will do, but we've always done our own little curriculum, I feel like, in February for Black History Month. And we celebrate Kwanzaa too, so we always kind of come off of Kwanzaa at the end of December, and then it feels like, MLK Day, and then going into Black History Month. So for her, she kind of all sees it all together type of situation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any specific Black History Month traditions. I started in being really intentional when we at my work were given Juneteenth off. I started to center some practices very specifically around that day, and then some like reading a book specifically around, and I'm a slow reader, so it's like longer than that day, donating to Black individuals rather than organizations. So now you have me thinking, I'm like, I have my goals for the new year. I need like a Black History Month goal too.
Well, so there's this nature photographer that I follow on Instagram, and it was actually Juneteenth a couple of years ago that that really inspired me. Her Instagram handle is @WildGina, and she's a Black landscape nature photographer. Her photos are stunning. But a couple times a year, Juneteenth, I think Labor Day, maybe Black Friday, and then Black History Month, she does this, I don't know, it's like her own little program, but basically you can buy her Black art for a Black individual.
Oh, wow.
And so if you're a Black person that wants her art, she usually assigns like an emoji. So it'll be like a sunflower. You drop a sunflower in the comments, and then non-Black folks will get their own emoji, like a watering can or something. And so you use the emojis to signify, if you're a Black person, that you want her art, and then the non-Black person uses that emoji to buy that art for that person. And so I've done that for Juneteenth. And folks could even go in, we could even go in and do that for Black History Month. Go have, halvesies on buying Black art for a Black person. But at the food bank, a couple years ago, we did Soul Food Fest right at the end of February, and just, of course, centered around food, came together. Maybe we'll do that again this year.
Yum.
And it just even got me thinking about soul food history, Black food history in the U.S. And so there's this docu-series on Netflix. I was texting Jefferson and Mike, like, do one of you have a Netflix account? Because I don't. It's Hand Over Hog.
High on the Hog.
High on the Hog. Thank you.
I feel like I've seen that.
Have you? It's like 2 seasons.
Our policy director at Surge has told me about it and was like, you need to watch it. And I'm like, I'm going to. But yes, I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I was just, thinking, of course, with our work, it's centered around food, and how can we, think about the ways that the Black community, of course, has contributed to food in the U.S. And so we'll probably do something like that. But I think there's a lot of wonderful Black businesses in the Central District that people can go to. Of course, Black history isn't just 1 month of the year, right? There's hundreds of years of contribution from Black folks to our country, but just taking the time to be intentional and recognize that, I think is really important for all of us.
I feel like we need to do an episode on soul food because of the history of it, and then like the oppression behind it, and how, and I don't know if either of you know anything about this, but like coming out of that and how there's conversations with Black folks around how that food maybe should evolve to like come into like liberation rather than the racist history of like the different animal parts and things that
Right.
were used to make the food.
Yeah, given the scraps,
Exactly.
right, in meager portions and things that are not necessarily have nutritional value. It makes me think a lot about just like even the food system now and food apartheid now, like how things are, food oppression is still happening.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I was trying to say.
It's an everyday thing.
Yeah, but certainly how folks were able to make something special with even just the scraps, and now it's like, you know, that's what we think of as Southern food, but it really is thanks to Black folks, slaves. No big announcements from White Center Food Bank, but Hunger Action Day in Olympia is February 24th. So you can find ways to get involved if you want to, probably through our social media. If like there's anything happening specific that the food bank knows about, we'll be sure to post it there. There is the Anti-Hunger and Nutrition Coalition, which usually puts together a really nice day for meal programs and food banks in Olympia that day. So you can follow them if there's any pressing legislation that you want to get involved with. But other than that, thanks for hanging out with us today. We had another really exciting guest, our sister
you, Jackie.
Yay,
we could
thank you.
probably add a third host to this podcast. But thank you for joining us on Keep the Community Fed podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow White Center Food Bank on all the socials at White Center Food Bank. Bye.
Bye.